Hello, this is Chris from the Motion Bench. In today's video, we're taking a first look at the Anycubic Photon P1, an entry-level industrial resin printer that recently came out of Kickstarter. We'll start with the unboxing, walk through the setup, then run some initial test prints to see how it performs. Quick disclaimer, this video is not sponsored and no company had any input into its content. Let's get started. You may notice some on-screen focus guides in parts of this footage. There was a camera setting I missed during recording. I've corrected it moving forward. Once we open the box, you'll be greeted with a bunch of styrofoam in a small box with accessory parts in it. We'll go over what's in there later. I do like the fact that they use this soft, flexible foam as opposed to the hard, brittle styrofoam that a lot of places use. This just helps protect things better and it doesn't break easily during shipping, which keeps all your parts inside a lot safer. Once you remove the first couple layers of styrofoam, you'll see the printer inside. I'm going to have to stand it back up in order to lift it out of the box. I just wanted you to get a clear view of how it looks inside. I'll go ahead and flip this over and get the printer out of the box. There's quite a bit of styrofoam packaging around the printer, which I'll remove and set aside. Right away, it's clear this is very well packaged. There's really no chance of damage during shipping unless something extreme happens, like it being pierced by a sharp object. Once we have all the styrofoam removed, there's a label on the bag that says remove printer by lifting bag, so we're going to do that just like so. And then we'll set this box out of the way. Once you get your printer out of the box, it'll look like this. Once we get the styrofoam and other packing material removed, this is the Anycubic Photon P1. There's protective plastic around the front and sides of the enclosure, which I'll go ahead and peel off now. Opening this up reveals more styrofoam. They clearly put a lot of effort into packaging this well, which is good to see. It's always better to have more protection than not enough, especially with something like this. Inside, there's a large block of styrofoam, and within that we have the standard P1 build plate. There's also an optional perforated plate available, which I don't have yet but plan to test in the future with more advanced materials. The included build plate itself is made from SUS 304 stainless steel, which should provide good durability and corrosion resistance. Inside the accessories box, there's a small bag that includes some wet wipes, an Allen key, a USB stick, and a plastic scraper. There's also a user manual, a couple pairs of gloves, and some filters for pouring resin back into the bottle. You also get a metal spatula along with the power cord. Overall, it's a fairly minimal set of accessories, which is pretty typical. The machine itself comes mostly pre-assembled. One of the first things I noticed is the lid. It feels solid, fits well, and doesn't flop around. It holds its position firmly and has a nice controlled resistance when opening and closing, which gives it a more premium feel. Just keep in mind you'll need some clearance behind the printer to fully open it. The rear of the printer is very simple and straightforward. There's an electronics panel on the back that provides access to the main board and other internal components. We also have the standard power input here, and there's a port for the Anycubic AirPure 2.0, which allows you to connect a blower and vent tubing to direct fumes outside. Taking a look inside, it uses dual linear rails along with a ball screw for the Z-axis rather than a standard lead screw, which is a good sign. Even though this is positioned as an entry-level industrial machine and the ball screw itself may not be top tier, it should still offer better performance than the typical lead screw setups found on most consumer printers. Overall, this should provide smoother and more stable motion for the Z-axis. After plugging the printer in, one thing I noticed right away is the power cable is only about 3 feet long, which is pretty short. That might be fine if you've got an outlet right next to your setup, but for most people it's going to be a bit limiting. I would have liked to see something closer to a standard 6-foot cable included. That said, let's go ahead and power it on and get this thing started. The setup process is pretty straightforward. You start by selecting your language, in my case English. Next, it asks you to select a server. I'm going to go with the global option. On first launch, it walks you through the initial setup, starting with homing in the Z-axis. The Z-axis will lift up to its 0 position, which lets you remove the remaining foam block inside, along with the blue tape holding the lock mechanism in place. Once that's done, it shows that the Z-axis homing is complete and we can continue. Next step is installing the build plate. There's a small graphic on screen showing how to do this. Just lift the locking tab, slide the build plate into place, and lock it down. I will say I do prefer this style of mounting over what's used on something like the Photon M7 Pro. It's easier to work with and feels more straightforward. Once the build plate is installed, the next step is to install, or in this case remove, the vat, which is held in place by a simple locking mechanism. This is a nice improvement over something like the M7 Pro, which uses 2 thumb screws to secure the vat in place. Here there are tabs on both sides and the vat lifts straight up and out, making it quick and easy to work with. Right off the bat, one thing I noticed they changed is the heating system for the resin. On something like the M7 Pro, it uses a pump system that circulates resin through a heater and back into the vat, which adds extra steps, moving parts, and maintenance. Here it looks like there's a heating element wrapped around the vat itself, which should be more than sufficient for bringing the resin up to temperature and getting it ready for printing. There are also guide tabs along the bottom that align with mounting points on the printer, so the vat just slides into place. Once it's seated, you lock it in using the tabs on each side and it's ready to go. Alright, now taking a closer look at the interface, we have the main screen here which lets us switch between single and dual print modes along with various status information for the printer. On the next screen we have our storage options including internal storage, USB and cloud where we can access files for printing along with a video and log tab for viewing that information. On the next screen we have adjustment options for the Z-axis and exposure along with the clear up function for cleaning the vat and a few additional tuning settings. Finally we have the settings screen where we can configure things like the network and app connection, check firmware versions and updates, and adjust general system settings. Now that we've gone through the interface, we can go ahead and remove the protective film from both the vat and the LCD. We'll open the locking tabs and carefully lift the vat straight up and out, making sure not to damage the screen underneath. Then we can peel the protective film off the vat and do the same for the LCD screen. Once that's done, we'll reinstall the vat, lock it back into place, and get everything ready to go. At that point, it's just a matter of pouring in some resin and starting a print. For testing, I'll be running a few different types of resins. Here I have some Anycubic standard gray resin, along with some Elegoo ABS-Like 3.0 Pro, and Siraya Tenacious gray. Another thing I noticed is there are some sensors built into the machine along with a camera that comes with a cover installed by default. This allows for time lapses and basic monitoring, which is a nice feature to have, although I'm not sure how useful time lapses will be for smaller prints. That said, it would be helpful if there was some kind of indicator or label for the camera since that protective cap is easy to miss. At first glance, it almost looks like it could be a fuse or something similar, but it's actually just covering the camera. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pour some resin into the vat. While we're on that, one thing I did notice is the vat has a large spout for pouring resin back out and into a bottle or container. That's a definite improvement over something like the M7 Pro, and I know this isn't meant to be a direct comparison between the two printers, but it's a reference point I have, so it's worth mentioning. The spout design here is a big upgrade and it should make pouring resin out much easier. At any rate, let's pour some filament in and get ready to print. We only have a handful of files on the USB drive, so we'll go ahead and choose the one labeled test. Again, this is using the Anycubic standard resin. We'll start the print and let the machine run through its process, homing and leveling the bed. Hopefully everything works out of the box as expected. It didn't walk me through any steps for leveling the bed or setting a Z offset, so we'll see how that's handled. On something like the M7 Pro, I had to manually set the Z offset before running a print, but that doesn't seem to be the case here. So I'm just going to follow the process as a typical user would, and we'll see how well the automatic leveling and Z offset perform. Alright, we're back here at the workbench after completing our test prints. Tested 3 different types of models with 3 different types of resins. The first one is the Anycubic standard resin, which you can see here in the middle. This is the default test file that comes on the USB stick you get with the printer. These here on the left are printed in Elegoo ABS-Like 3.0 Pro resin. These are some hinge tolerance tests. I'll leave a link to the files that I use down in the description below. And then here on the right, I use Siraya Tenacious Easy Gray. And these are some snap fit joint test prints. So we're going to go through each one. We're going to look at the quality. We're going to look at the functionality, the strength and durability as much as we can with these smaller parts. The first thing that I would like to note with these prints is that all of them printed successfully on the first attempt. I didn't have any issues with bed adhesion or anything like that. I did not have any failures through any of these tests. I did use standard profiles for all of these prints. I used the standard resin profile for this one. I used the ABS-Like profile for this one, and I downloaded the Siraya Tenacious profile for this one. I did not modify any of the settings outside of the defaults. I didn't have to go through and manually level the bed. It did it all on its own. So that's definitely good for an out-of-box experience, that it just works. Of course, it's not an extensive test, but the 3 prints that I tried, I didn't have any failures with. Removing from the build plate was pretty easy. And now we'll go ahead and go through and look at each print individually a lot more closely and see where some of the drawbacks are, what it did well, and where it kind of failed a little bit. The first one is the test print that comes on the USB stick you get with the printer. And as you can see here right off the bat on the 0.1 up here and the 0.15, we did have some failures there. The little towers that print vertically right there did not complete successfully very well. The 0.15 is a little bit better than the 0.1. I don't know if these can be printed successfully after doing some tuning and things like that. It's a little bit outside of the scope of this video. I also noticed down here on this corner there's some white residue that's left over. This is probably an error on mine. You can see like a shiny coating here. I might either need to change my IPA and my wash bucket, or I just didn't inspect it close enough after I washed the prints off. So I'm not going to fault the printer for this, because I'm pretty sure that this error was on me. And then again here as well with these diagonals, the 0.2 on these horizontal diagonals did print fine, but the 0.1 did not. Same thing with the holes. You can kind of see the holes for the 0.2, but you can't see the holes at all for the 0.1. And then when we look here at the lines, let's zoom in a little bit more here. We look here at the lines, you can almost see a little bit of the line on the 0.02, but they're not quite clear. You can see the 0.03 printed relatively well, and then it really starts to look good at 0.06 and larger. And then these here for the indented ones, it's kind of hard to see it on camera, but if I'm looking at it with the naked eye, I can see up to, I want to say, I mean, it's really hard to see that. It's so small. I want to, with the naked eye, I can see up to 0.08. So the 0.02, 0.03, and 0.06 are not visible either here on the camera or to the naked eye, but I can see the 0.08 ever so slightly. And then the same thing with the 0.1. It's hard to see here on camera, but I can see the cutout with the naked eye. This little spiral diagonal looks like it printed really well. I think this little piece here is an artifact from the cleaning and washing. Let's see if I can get that to scrape out of there. Yeah, this was just a piece of the support material that got stuck in between there. So that, you know, this little spiral piece here looks like it printed well. We have the text for freedom to make written on the side very clearly here. We have the Anycubic logo here. And again, even on the 0.08 and 0.8 and 0.9, you can see some of that white residue. I believe this is an error on my end, so it's something I'll look out for when I do future testing, as well as this. I'm not sure if I spilled something on this accidentally, or it seems pretty hard. So this might have been leftover resin, or I didn't let the alcohol dry all the way. So that's kind of an issue on my end, not the printer. I'll definitely make sure to rectify that in the future. Overall, the quality is really quite nice. I mean, up to a certain level of detail, I can't really think of anything offhand that would print at 0.01. Of course, just because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But with the default settings, you're not going to get the finest of details with these 0.1 and 0.15. Possibly you can get there with tuning the resin and the printer settings and stuff like that. But that's outside of the scope of this initial testing. All the parts seem to be really well, like these are pretty flexible. Oh, there we go, I just snapped them off. This resin is pretty fragile. I mean, I pushed on them a little bit and they snapped off. That's on me. And then moving on, I printed a bunch of these hinge tolerance tests. They come in several different sizes. This one, it starts at the highest end of 0.5 and down to 0.1. So these ones printed flat like this, and then these ones here that are stiff, they still have some support material in between. Those printed vertically like this. I didn't want to snap the supports off until I was filming for this review, and basically we'll just move that back and forth, break them free, and now we have quite a loose hinge. You can see the tolerance is pretty noticeable on how loose they are. And it's the same thing with the one that printed flat. So these are virtually identical in that regard. So then we'll check out the 0.4. And then again on this one, it's quite loose. The tolerance is, I guess, about where you would expect it. They do function as expected and intended. And then the 0.4 of the vertical, again, we'll snap the supports out of there and they rotate and move just as well. 0.3 is more of the same. Of course, as we get into the lower tolerance test, the less wiggle room we're going to have in between these hinges. Up and down like this, that's going to be about the same for all of them, but in between with the shaft that goes up through the middle, and these were printed in place, that wiggle room or that looseness is going to decrease. So that's the horizontal one, and then this is the vertical one. Again, once we get the support material out of there, the hinge functions as expected. Another thing you might notice is I did not go through and clean these prints up to the best of my ability. I did wash them for several minutes and then I cured them using my wash and cure station. I could have done some more post-processing, but I wanted to show you the print as raw as possible as it came out of the machine and fully cured. Of course, when you're printing finer detail things, you're going to want to do a lot more post-processing and perfect them, but that's just a little bit outside of the scope of this video. I just wanted you to see the raw print, no editing or anything done to the pieces. to make them work or function. I just scraped them off the bed and put them in the wash and then cured them. So again, here at the 0.2, now we're starting to, like, we really have no play back and forth in this piece, but it does still function as intended and expected. It goes all the way to close and then all the way, almost all the way to open. I think that's just due to some of the support material still left on the backside. And then again, the same thing with the vertical one. We'll try to snap it free, snap the support materials, and here we have our first failure. So on the vertical, it snapped off when we tried to break it free to use it. So there you have that. And then the 0.1, this was printed flatly, and there's no movement here. We're going to try to break it free if we can. Again, this is 0.1 tolerance, so this is probably going to break apart as well. But we will try and see. Yeah, it looks like the shaft inside snapped on here as well. It didn't fully break apart like the vertical 0.2, but it's definitely broken. As if I try to close it, you can see it's starting to come out on the backside here. So again, this may or may not be something that can be adjusted with the print settings and the resin settings. And then lastly, on the ABS-Like 3.0 Pro, we'll go ahead and try to break this one free and see if it functions. Nope, we just snapped it completely off. So I will say down to the horizontal one, down to 0.2 is where the test succeeded. And then 0.2 on the vertical, and both 0.1s failed after trying to free them. Moving on to the Siraya Tenacious. All of these came out relatively good quality. These here are snap fit tests. So we're going to test the functionality of that. This one does snap into place as expected. The tolerance is quite tight as expected. I did notice that there's a little bit of a blemish here on this side. Again, this is probably due to the cleaning and curing process and not the print itself, because I didn't notice that on any other parts of this particular piece. But it snaps into place as expected, and then pulling it back apart, it does come off. This Tenacious filament is supposed to be more flexible and durable. So we're going to go ahead and test that now, see if we can get these, how much force we can put to get these tabs to break. And after bending it all the way down like so, it did not snap, so that's a good sign. Moving on to the next one, we have this little cap style piece. It snaps on like so, fits very tightly. This one doesn't really rotate. Like I said, it fits quite tightly and it does not rotate. So I'm actually going to need to use my spatula here to kind of pry that back off of there. And again, even with this resin, you can see the quality is pretty on par here. Each side of the piece prints like it's supposed to, and it, you know, it snaps in place as expected, and it really holds in place. I mean, I'd probably have to get some pliers to pull it apart without the spatula. So it's locked into place. I mean, I can't get it off without it. So again, we'll pull that off, take a look at some of the flexibility of the part here, and that's pretty flexible in that regard. And then it kind of more or less goes back into shape. You can bend it a little bit back into shape, but it holds its shape as well. Like, obviously I'm forcing creases into the part, which is going to prevent it from reforming. But here, squeezing this one pretty hard, it did cause it to snap. All in all, this was another success. And then we have this style of little box. These tabs here are supposed to clip inside of the print like so. We'll slide that down into place. Everything locks in. Those tabs line up as expected. Again, this is just leftover bits of the support material that I didn't clean up. I didn't want to misrepresent the prints in any way, so that's why I didn't spend any time post-processing them. Obviously, with a little bit of sandpaper, maybe some files and some acetone or whatever, you'll be able to smooth these out. Like, I can scrape the rest of the support material off of here with a blade. So there's nothing wrong in that regard. I just did not want to oversell the parts as they come out of the printer, if that makes any sense. Moving on, we have another little test here. These are some little lever arms that flex quite nicely back and forth. So that's really a testament to this resin. I would not be able to do this with the standard resin that I use to print these, or the ABS-Like that I use to print these. So this Siraya Tenacious really does seem to work as advertised. Obviously, I'll have to test everything more thoroughly in future videos, but again, these prints came out quite nice. All in all, I would say that all of my test prints came out great. We did have some minor failures with the 0.1 and the 0.15 on the default test print. And again, we had a failure on the 0.2 vertical piece of the hinges, as well as both of the 0.1. Once again, these were printed in the Elegoo ABS-Like 3.0 Pro. And then finally, we did not have any out-of-the-box failures with the Siraya Tenacious resin. I wanted to test this more for durability and flexibility to make sure that it works as expected than I was for detail. These two prints were more for detail and things like that. The prints with the Siraya were more for functionality of the part. Just to touch on it again, bed adhesion, didn't have any issues there. Leveling out of the box did not have any issues. Detail quality, we went over that individually with each part. Surface finish, there are some artifacts, but again, at this time, I'll chalk that up to my own negligence in cleaning and curing the parts correctly. So when I do a deeper dive into testing this printo thoroughly, I will make sure that I remove that negligence and fault of my own, and then we'll see how things look from there. Removing all of these from the build plate was a fairly straightforward process. I like to take this ground edge of the spatula and face it down, using that to scrape along the print bed because it gives me a little bit of like a chisel or an angle to get underneath the print a little bit easier. Removing each of the test prints from the bed was actually quite easy. I noticed that they were easier to remove from the new Photon P1 than they are my M7 Pro. One issue that I did have in Anycubic Workshop on my Windows computer is the first time I tried to send these prints over the network from my computer to the printer, it kept failing to download to the printer, and I had to copy the sliced file for this manually to the USB stick and then start the print from there. After these hinges finished printing, I did restart the printer, so I powered it down, powered it back on, and then I was finally able to send the file over Anycubic Workshop to the printer as expected. I'm not really sure what went on there. Maybe there's a bug in the firmware that'll be updated in the future. I don't really know. But other than that, there were really no surprises. Didn't run into any issues. Again, out of the box, I'd give this probably an 8 out of 10, maybe a 9 out of 10 out of the box experience. Again, none of my prints failed on the first attempt. You know, obviously 3 successful test prints does not prove that the machine is reliable long term. I will do some more heavy testing in that regard. All in all, I have enjoyed using this Anycubic Photon P1 so far. As far as price is concerned, as of right now on the Anycubic store, the base configuration for this printer is listed at $599 US. I think, me personally, I think that this is a fair price to pay. It is showing the retail price as $700 on their website, and then there's $100 off at present. I'm assuming because it's a new printer and it's still in a kind of a launch promo. But all in all, do I think that it's worth $600? I would really say that it depends on what you're using it for. I think that if you're going to use this for just some hobby level miniatures and things like that, probably not, because you can find a printer that at a much cheaper price range that can do your miniatures and things like that very reliably and very well. So if that's what you're printing, you know, just a hobby user level case scenario, then this probably isn't the printer for you. If you want to get into printing more advanced resins and things like that for like actual business and industrial use, then yes, I think that this printer is worth it. But as a hobby machine, no, I can't see justifying the price just for that. Another feature of this printer that you're probably not going to find anywhere else is the dual vat and dual print bed configuration. You know, you have to purchase that separately, but I'm not too sure how practical that is for your everyday user. I don't want to call it a gimmick. I'm sure that there are plenty of good use cases for that kind of system. So it's good that they offer it. And, you know, if you have a use case for yourself that could benefit from this kind of configuration, then that's definitely a positive as well. Other than that, I mean, aside from the short 3-foot power cable that it came with, I guess that'd be my biggest complaint. Another thing that I would like to see in something like this is a more robust solution for filtration. So if I'm thinking that this is being used in a dental office, for example, since they show this, you're not going to be able to exhaust out your window of a dental office. It's just not going to happen. So it would be nice to have something that's more kind of built into the machine, or something that you can add onto the back of the machine that can, you know, really handle some high-end filtration. If you've never used a resin printer before, just know the stuff stinks. It smells bad, and it's probably not good for you. At any rate, that's it for this first look at the Anycubic Photon P1. Initial results are promising, with more testing to come in the future. I do plan to put this printer through its paces with extended use, additional resins, and more demanding prints to see if it actually lives up to the claim of being a reliable entry-level industrial resin printer. As always, if you found this video helpful or insightful in any way, please consider commenting, liking, and subscribing, and thank you for watching.